Hello and welcome to the first webinar in our three-part series on the flexible futures of work, where we'll be hearing from a range of global recruitment experts, remote work advocates, and HR leaders on flexible work. My name's David Holland. I've been with Employment Hero for around 6 years, and I'm the General Manager of Talent Solutions, which means I oversee our employer of record service global teams. In today's session, we'll be focusing on the changing perceptions around remote work and why remote. It's been a year since we last had a conversation around this, so it'll be fascinating to see how this very dynamic area has evolved. We want to, throughout this series, explore not just the whys, but also the benefits and the challenges of adopting remote work and how it's shaping work trends. Throughout the discussions over the next couple of days, I'll be referencing some insights and statistics from our most recent remote work survey, in which we surveyed over 6,000 people from 5 regions around the world about what and how and where they work today. These unique insights will aid some of our discussions today. Before I introduce our guests, a couple of quick matters. We do have time allocated, as always, for your questions. We really encourage people to interact and to use this as an opportunity to get answers to the questions that might be on your mind. So please don't hesitate to type your questions into the box below. Typically, you may well see a chat function, but there's also a dedicated Q&A, and I would encourage you to use the Q&A channel rather than the chat, because that allows us to curate those and share them with everyone and get your questions answered. I'd also like to note that today's session will be recorded, and these recordings are made available, as we've done in the past with our previous series, as an on-demand webinar that'll be available via our website. So with that all done, I now have the pleasure of introducing our panelists today. First up, we have Nadia Harris, who's founder of Remote Work Advocate. Nadia is a global expert of remote and hybrid work and advocates for companies that foster flexible employment. Her aim is to build a bridge between the business needs of companies and flexible work, and doing this by eliminating bias against remote work, hybrid work, helping with its implementation and highlighting the efficient performance. During her career, she's worked with numerous international companies, both startups and corporations, and that's allowed her to gain valuable and intercultural experience and insights. Her areas of expertise include HR operations, growth, worldwide talent strategies, as well as designing and implementing HR processes and procedures. So Nadia, thank you very much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure, and I'm very excited to be able to share insights today when it comes to making remote work mainstream. Thank you.
Fantastic. We really value your experience. And secondly, Jamie Finnegan, who's head of talent at Finder. Some of you may remember Jamie from our previous series on remote work last year. Jamie has extensive experience working at top Australian startups to help hire talent, consult on growth and strategy, and to advise on company values and its culture. He's passionate about creating a work environment in which everyone feels comfortable, valued, and empowered. In his current role, Jamie is responsible for the growth of Finder's team, whilst also designing and driving business initiatives to further enhance Finder's unique global culture. Jamie, it's great to see you again. Thanks for coming back.
Hey, Dutchy. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, look, as usual, we're going to kick off with a bit of a poll, and that's to give us a bit more of an understanding of who's joining us today. So we're going to ask you this simple question, just to get an idea of where everybody's at. Which of the following options best describes your business? Is the business 100% remote? Is it hybrid 1 to 2 days a week in the office? Is it hybrid 3 to 4 days in the office? Or is it 100% in the office? I know those things aren't necessarily in order, so you might have to just think about that a little bit, and I'm going to fill out mine. Oh, hosts and panelists can't vote. Well, that's a shame. But if you guys can start filling that out, we'll share those results with you momentarily. So thanks for doing that. As usual, I love to kick these conversations off with our panelists and guests sharing a little bit about their current situation and their journey. So I'd like to start perhaps with, hang on, we got the results in, so we'll just do that. So what we've got is, 14% are all remote, and 37% are 3 to 4 days, 36% are 1 to 2 days in the office. So that's around about half. That's exactly half who are all remote or mainly remote, and roughly half who are mainly in the office or all in the office. In fact, those results are very clearly spread quite in a mirror, a great deal of symmetry. So that's a good spread of people for today's discussion. Nadia, I think I'll kick off with you if that's okay. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you said, I think you're in London today, but I think you're based, well, actually, I don't know where you're based because every time I talk to you, you're somewhere different. But yeah, if you can maybe just let us know a little bit about you and your journey towards remote.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So I started working remotely before it was trendy, which was 2015. I started off with working globally. At that time, I lived in the States, and I thought, well, it's a shame that the world is becoming a global village when it comes to every area of your life, but work is kind of limited just to one location. And it was definitely time to challenge that. So during that time, remote wasn't as popular as today, but there were definitely companies that were remote first, meaning they never had an office, but they had teams distributed all around the world. So I was the one to work with them to make processes scalable, to be able to design how a company can function efficiently without having to meet physically. Obviously, it's a myth that remote teams never meet in real life, because they do. Once in a while, every quarter, every 6 months, they do meet in real life, but still, it is always a choice, but they can function without having the office, right? That's the way it was. And then throughout time, I started working with hybrid companies. The hybrid wasn't really a name. Today, they're called hybrid. Back then, it was a mix of people being in the office and working from different locations, even sales teams traveling all the time. So how to make sure that they feel connected. So hybrid was with us all the time, really, but we just started giving it a name quite recently. So my role was to start making it work so that everyone knows what to do, all the tasks that are being assigned to everybody, how we can communicate efficiently, how we can use asynchronous communication, how also from a legal perspective, we can make sure that we are in different countries, but we're still part of a team, which was very, very uncommon before 2020. And then throughout time, when the pandemic unfortunately started, well, obviously hybrid working and remote working started being on the radar. And then I started dealing with a mindset shift, I would say. So what we learned, what teams learned, was to be able to work without being in an office. But now, how do we make it scalable? How do we make it part of our business model? So I think the biggest shift among global teams was to change the way of thinking that work is not a place. It's not necessarily just 9 to 5, but it's about delivering the results based on objectives and priorities. So we had 2 areas. The first area was always remote first, and how these teams operate, really interesting to see, versus the transition. And this is something that I've been doing throughout the past few years. And it's been a really, really exciting journey. And I'm happy to share all insights today. Thank you.
Terrific. And can you just tell me briefly a little bit about remoteadvocate.com?
Yes, absolutely. I founded remoteworkadvocate.com a few years ago, and I thought it would be a place for companies to find resources about making remote work and distributed work. So I have developed throughout the years a product that was also called a remote ready audit, which meant, how does a company know that they are ready to work remotely? So that is communication. Is our communication ready to be distributed, in other words? Or is everything, for example, not documented? Do we have chit chats in the hallway? It's not scalable. So people who are not in the office will miss out, right? So it's communication processes, procedures. How, again, can we operate efficiently without physically meeting? It's the toolkit. How can we make a scalable toolkit, right? It doesn't mean that we're going to download 15 different applications and say, yes, we have Zoom, we have Slack, we have Teams, we have everything. How they are connected, that's what's important. So definitely those were the things that I was doing, that I've been doing mainly, and I write about it a lot. There's a blog, feel free to check it out. There are almost nearly 100 articles right now about different topics. You can filter them, check out, and get inspired with real life business cases from companies that I've worked with for the past few years.
Fantastic. I think documentation and communication are always recurring themes in this topic, and I'm sure they'll pop up today and in the coming episodes. Jamie, remind us a little bit, for those who didn't join us last year, about what Finder does and how you've been on your journey towards hybrid work.
Yeah, we'll do. Cheers, Dutchy. That's a tough intro to follow there, Nadia. That's some amazing work you've done in this space. So congratulations on all that. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm the global head of talent at a company called Finder. For those who aren't familiar with Finder, we're Australia's most visited comparison website. We've been around for over 15 years now, and we've grown from when I joined 5.5 years ago, shy of 100 people to over 600 globally now. Those crew members are based across over 20 different locations or countries around the world, and we've got currently, I believe, 7 offices globally as well. We've been kind of born hybrid in that sense. I think we've always had a mix of people in an office and based completely remotely, or a mixture of remote and in the office since our inception. So that's been a bit of a bonus for us. 40% of the crew were working completely remotely in some form prior to the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic changed that, and it was 100% remote. And then post-pandemic, we've had to do a lot of kind of reframing and rethinking. It's been a ongoing evolution and challenge, I think, for us as a business, but one that we're wholeheartedly committed to. I think it's not about creating a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about creating kind of individual cases that work for each of the people. And we do have one of our core values is one crew, and we want to make sure that we have the same opportunities for all of our crew to work either in an office or remotely as well. I personally I've just come back from a journey of parental leave where I was on leave for 12 weeks in the UK. I haven't seen my family or anyone for a very long time. Got married and had a child during that period of not seeing anyone. And it was an amazing opportunity to be able to go back and visit everyone, meet my nephew, allow family to see our baby boy Bray. But I also was able to work for a couple of weeks while I was over there. We've got an office in London where I worked for some time, and I also worked remotely in Manchester for a week as well when I was over there. So it's just my personal journey with that in very recent times as well.
Yeah, great. Very productive use of the lockdown. Jamie, just remind me of that statistic, that percentage of your crew that were working remotely even before March 2020.
40% of the entire workforce at Finder, or the crew, were working remotely in some way prior to the pandemic. Yeah. And
was that an intentional thing? Were there processes specifically to support that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the processes and rituals that businesses would have formed during the pandemic, very thankfully, we had to think about some of those prior to, and we were kind of therefore as well set up as we could be for something like the pandemic happening and everyone being forced into a situation. I think, as Nadia referenced there, the tools and softwares that you can use help with that somewhat, but I think also creating practices and rituals around those, communicating in a certain way, all those things are the things we've had to think about and evolve over time as well.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, we at Employment Hero had handfuls of remote, and people were certainly remote for periods of time, but we were very fortunate that a lot of the rituals that are tools that were required to go remote were already in place, including a wonderful HR platform. But right, let's get into it. Thanks for those introductions, guys. One of the things I'm really keen to observe through this episode and the next couple of chats is how things have changed since we did a similar exercise 18 months ago. But as we mentioned, we've done some insights reports, and it's interesting that data that we just did with the poll with everyone online, where I think if I work it out, 86% of people on this call today are working either all remote or partially remote. Couple of stats for you, which is interesting. And this survey is literally over the last couple of months, 6,000 people across 5 regions around the world. 89% of New Zealand employees want to continue working remotely at least part of the time. In the UK, 64% of workers are still working either remotely or hybrid. And 61% of Australian millennials say they will quit if they will choose a job or quit a job if they were forced to return to the office on a permanent basis. And I think, we're seeing that data fairly consistently around the world. And with a mind on if that's our candidate pools, if that's how our candidate pools, if our future workforce are thinking along those lines, I'd like to try and delve into that and the concept of a global talent pool. Nadia, if I can come to you first, from what you're seeing through your work, through your clients, and through your community, with remote advocate. What are you seeing as what are the most businesses and what are most employees now considering? Give us a bit of a snapshot of what you're seeing, probably a concentration on Europe and North America with your experience, and what are you seeing with regard to attitudes towards remote, priorities to get back in the office, and any insights as to why you think those things are happening? That's a big question to start off.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So one of the things that I also do is I design talent strategies for companies now, distributed companies, to make sure that they can access people that they really need for their team. Why am I mentioning this right now? Well, because I'm also like running my surveys, so to say. So whenever someone is looking for a remote job, when we look for active candidates, then there's always a field. What's your main motivation? Just in one sentence, just because I want to know and I set it up that way. And I have to tell you seriously, the majority says my employer doesn't allow me to work remotely. That's usually the main trigger. I can tell you this. And those are teams in Europe, in the United States, in Canada, sales, marketing positions, IT, oh my goodness, literally, finance, administration as well. And those are thousands and thousands of people coming in through different resources. So I see that this is definitely happening. That's the first thing. The second thing is what's actually really interesting is that people are reevaluating their life. And that's something that we see in Europe a lot, meaning that pre-pandemic, it was work, we did things the way they were, and that's it. And then we had a bit more time to think about the meaning of our life, of our career. And now people, they're more open to challenging things the way they were and saying, okay, we really value work-life balance, right? We really want to have time to spend it with our family. What's interesting actually in Europe, they're part of the EU. We have the European Commission, and they a few years ago, even pre-pandemic in 2019, something called the work-life balance directive has been released, which is now being implemented in all EU member states. So the work-life balance directive says precisely that remote work has to be granted, has to be allowed to employees in certain situations. For example, if you have a child that you have to take care of, I don't remember if it's up to 6 or 8 years of age, and also if you're a caregiver. So sometimes when I observe employers in the EU saying, no, you have to come back to the office, we won't allow this, I'm like, well, the truth is that within some time, it will actually become part of local laws. So there is nothing you can do. And if someone really applies to get that opportunity, you will have to say yes. So if you're not ready to approach this model wisely, then still in the end, it will always be part of an emergency situation for you because you just won't be ready. So, and also from an employer's perspective, I definitely see more companies going towards the hybrid model. And that's very interesting because that's also something that I'm trying to work on a bit when it comes to creating awareness, is that hybrid is not an emergency solution to connect the old normal with the new normal, because I see that it's some kind of safe space from a company's and people's mindset to be like, okay, you want to be remote. The statistics that you've shared now, they're very similar all around the world. So, okay, people, employees, you want to be remote, but we still invested so much money in our offices. So let's try to build a bridge so you'll be in the office and you won't be in the office because we allow you to do so. If we use the word allow, that means it's always going to be an exception. And it's actually about being able to be super efficient, to challenging the way we have worked in the past and be very intentional and use the offices to what benefits us most. And this is a really interesting concept. I see that you're willing to say something. Probably.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to jump in because there's so much there to unpack, and it's just
yeah.
A couple of things I just want to pull out there. I think one of the things that so firstly, what you're saying is in some of those European jurisdictions, you think that remote work and hybrid work and the ability to be flexible in where you work is actually going to become institutionalized through regulations. That's what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely.
But then let's dig into this phenomenon that you're seeing, which I think we're all seeing, and most people on the call today are experiencing, which is this concept of hybrid, that I'm in the office sometime, so many days a week or so many days a month. I think you picked up a really interesting point there, which is around the cost. You know, we've invested in this cost the office, and we kind of feel like we have to leverage it, and we're somehow creating, what was it you described, a kind of an interim model to try and bridge flexible work with office space. One of the things that I'm going to say here about hybrid, and I'm just going to offer this up as a reflection. I anticipate there'll be some negative reaction to it, but I've heard hybrid defined as the worst of both worlds, which is, I think, a reflection, and this is what I want to talk to you both about, is if I require someone to come to an office even 1 day a week, certainly 2 or 3 days a week, I immediately reduce my talent pool to an hour and a half of my office. So I'm back to the old way of recruiting. I can only recruit talent from within my community. Whereas if you're all remote and you're willing to make that available for people, obviously the world is your talent pool. But maybe if you can, sorry, I just wanted to unpack some of that because you were on a roll. Did you want to have any other final remarks around what you're seeing in the workplace with regard to flexible and remote working?
Maybe let me refer to what you're saying, and that is very true, because I think that the majority of people, when I ask them about the definition of hybrid working, that's exactly what they say. We are going to be in the office 1 or 2 or 3 days a week, but the truth is there is no one hybrid model. I've worked with companies that have opened hubs all around the world and all around in different countries where they have, for example, their entities registered. I've seen the UK, I've seen Spain, Portugal, Germany, Austria, Italy, Poland, where there is an office which offers the same experience to the users, right? You can go there if you want to, depending on where you are. So, for example, if they're in office gatherings every month or every 2-3 months, everyone flies in, they meet there, they spend time together. So this is how it's still possible to look at the office a different way than the 3-2-2-3 model. And interestingly, a concept for everyone who wants to redesign their office to not be mandatory just because. There's actually a company that I think most of you, almost all of you, I'm sure heard of. It's Dropbox. So Dropbox doesn't use the word office anymore. They use the word studio. And just exactly the same way I'm also describing it in my book that I released a month ago, How to Tackle Hybrid Working. When you look at the office, look at it as if it's a website, look at the user experience. So for example, Dropbox is saying, you don't have to come. If you want to fly in because you live somewhere else, you're more than happy to do that because we're meeting, but you don't have to. So we don't have to look at hybrid working as you have to be in the office just because. No, you don't have to. Maybe you can fly in every 6 months. Maybe you'll just meet in a hub, in a co-working space elsewhere. So I totally agree that it limits the talent pool if we look at it just this way.
I know that one of the questions that'll come up, particularly in the next episode when we start to talk about the how, is going to be how do we replace those serendipitous water cooler meetings and those moments of inspiration of 2 people walking down a hallway? But we'll talk about that in context. But thanks for that, Nadia. Jamie, over to you. I mean, you guys do have offices all around the world, but you can be all remote. I'd love to hear your perspective on that, but also just more generally, now that companies in general have the option of going back to the office, obviously we're not forced into lockdowns and forced to work remote. What are your observations that you see in other companies versus what you're experiencing within your employees at Finder, and your views on all remote versus perhaps hybrid, with a view that you do have, how many offices do you have around the world?
I believe we've currently got 7 offices globally, or offices in 7 countries, maybe that is. I think it's 9 offices actually, because we've got New York, Denver, and then Sydney, Adelaide. So we've got 9 offices in 7 countries. Yeah. I think just touch on, kind of caveat into that, a few different points you're talking about, the worst of both worlds in terms of a hybrid model. I think that's, if you define it to be prescriptive, as you mentioned, and it's a requirement versus a choice, then yes, it's always going to be viewed as the worst of anything, because it's not anyone actually making a decision, it's being forced into making a decision, whether that's hybrid working or anything else. I think the way that we've tried to approach this over the years is that we play all the cards in our deck. You know, location has never been a conversation stopper for us. It's about the individual and what they can bring to the business. You know, we link it back to our mission of empowering our members to make better decisions every day. There's plenty of people who are based in locations where we don't have an office around the world that are connected to that mission. For an example, 51% of our crew live in an office, live in a city where there is an office, which then means that 49% of our crew live in an office, live in a city where there isn't an office. including, you know, some of our leaders of our business. Our Chief People Officer, Shannon, lives in a city where there isn't an office. She's based in Melbourne, and we haven't got an office there yet. There has been discussion around that, but it's not something we've pulled the trigger on just yet. But yeah, I think you mentioned as well about kind of the millennial stats at the beginning there. You know, 50% of our crew globally are 34 and under. So, you know, appealing to what they want rather than just what the business needs. Again, we've done remote work surveys internally and gathered that data ourselves and listened to the data, not just gone, oh, this isn't telling us what we wanted to hear. You know, we've listened to exactly what it says and then acted upon it. And thankfully, you know, there's around 70% of the crew roughly who are have access to the Sydney office on a regular basis, actually use it on a regular basis. So it's not that they're being forced into using it. It's that they're actually making an active choice to do that. And it's up to us as a business to create some, I guess, yeah, memorable moments or moments of celebration where they can actually feel a good reason to come and visit. I personally like to, you know, spend time in there with my team when I can, who are based in Sydney, for one-on-ones or collaborative work, whatever it may be. But it doesn't necessarily mean I'll spend all my time in there if I'm doing deep focus work and the office isn't often conducive to that kind of work. So that's a bit of it from my kind of perspective there.
Yeah, terrific. I love that expression, you want to play all the cards in your deck. I think it really focuses in on one of the big advantages of all remote, or indeed the option to be remote if they're not in one of those 9 cities, which is that you are able to build teams from anywhere in the world. I guess question for you, when you're recruiting, when you're hiring, when you're developing strategies, not just individual roles, how big a component is the ability to work remotely, work from wherever I am today, wherever I want to be tomorrow? How big a part is that of your EVP? And secondly, I had a second question, which I've forgotten, so I'll remember that while you're answering the first one.
Look, I think it should be a big part of everyone's EVP, I think, or, you know, I think that the want for that from candidates has become a lot more prevalent. I think the stats you quoted at the beginning there show that if you're not listening to candidate feedback in the market or even what your own employees are saying, then again, that's probably the first data point you should be listening to. So if that's not giving you the reasoning behind making that a key point of your EVP, then it should be. So it's definitely become a big part of ours. And like I say, thankfully, I think it was beforehand, so it's not been a radical shift we've had to make in recent times.
Yeah. Terrific. All right. Well, thanks for that. Just a reminder to everyone, the questions are open. We've had a couple in. There's a couple there that have hit on the very juicy subject of businesses that are both site-based, restricted to site, and have headquarters, which we'll come on to later. But keep those questions coming. We are going to launch another quick poll, which is to get some insights from our audience. And it's picking up on that theme of recruiting with a remote component. So the question is, have you hired, in terms of the business that you're in today, the company that you're working in today, have you hired anyone outside of your headquarters city? And I'm just going to ask Sophia to leave that open for a little while. We can chat and then come back to the results of that. But I'd like to give everyone the opportunity to answer that. Terrific. All right. Well, we talked a little bit about remote in the context of EVP attracting, being able to employ from a broader talent pool and being able to attract a more diverse range of people. Nadia, one point that came up in one of our conversations earlier was the idea of diversity of ideas and the impact of that. Can I just ask you just to give us a short perspective around the benefit or the value of diversity of ideas in organizations?
Absolutely. So everyone who's interested in the topic, to dig into this deeper, I strongly recommend checking out BCG's, Boston Consulting Group's statistics and findings around it. And they're very clear. So they state exactly that if a team is culturally diverse and basically diverse, innovation boosts, which directly can be seen in business profits, right? So now, referring back to what you said before, if we hire people globally from different talent pools, cultural diversity is there, right? And I think it's also very interesting and crucial what you said, Jamie, that it's the mission that connects the people. So, and that's how I always approach that. So I know that for years and still today, what is crucial also in many businesses is the so-called cultural fit. So I believe, and that's how I've been working also with remote teams, with distributed teams, the culture fit here is not going to mean that we are all the same, but we are all different, right? With different backgrounds, with different approaches towards the business. Sometimes also coming from different areas, having different beliefs. And then when we connect together, that's going to give us so much added value, especially, and also I've seen this very interestingly in companies that are expanding to different markets. So pre-pandemic, it was very common when I worked with different companies that they said, okay, we are going to enter a different market. So locally, we need to hire an expert who's going to do that. Well, that was very, very challenging sometimes. It sometimes even required relocating someone. I've had that so many times, relocating people from South America to move to Europe and create a local diverse team. People from South Korea, for example, moving to the UK to be able to be part of the team to grow the business. And that was extremely, extremely difficult. But today, when we look at remote working and the possibility that it gives, if you're, for example, part of a company that is expanding rapidly, you don't have to do that anymore. So from a diversity perspective, then also when we look at different cultures, that is absolutely crucial because you already have people locally where you want to grow your business. That's number one. And number two, also when we look at diversity, I would like to say people with disabilities, not only culturally. I heard a very powerful statement a few weeks ago, and I think I mentioned that behind the scenes when we were talking about it, that if you say no to remote, that means basically the same thing as if you've said that people with physical disabilities can't work with you and they are not good enough to be part of your business, because what is going to be
that's a big claim.
Yeah, exactly. And this way you give them the opportunity and you really focus on the skill set, you know, and the output, the value, the knowledge, everything. And you know, it's such an important factor today, diversity and inclusion. So if you say no to remote working, it's like you're eliminating the most crucial component there is to make that happen.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of social and ethical reasons as to why we should drive inclusiveness, but there's also some really good business reasons too, which is, you know, there are people who are very comfortable being able to live their lives from the comfort of their homes, and if those people can be enabled and to do their best work and bring them into your workforce, that contributes to the diversity of ideas and talent. So yeah, thank you for that. Jamie, you actually play a pretty big role. Oh, sorry, the results of that poll are in. Have you recruited anyone outside of your headquarters city? So 60% of people have, which is interesting, and 40% haven't. So I wonder if an industry overlay would be interesting there. How many of those that haven't are in the hospitality, retail, construction industries, for example, and we'll come back to those questions later, but thanks for that. Jamie, you play quite a big role in the cultural development of the team and driving that within Finder. How does remote contribute to that? How does remote form a part of the culture that you drive? Nadia started to touch on inclusiveness and work-life balance. And from an employer side, what do you see as the advantages of remote in developing a culture?
Yeah, it's a very, very big question and a broad topic, but I'll try and be as succinct as I can with this. I think that, like I mentioned, within Finder, we've made a choice early on that that's the way we want to build a culture, and naturally that includes then people from different backgrounds, different countries, different viewpoints and everything, which builds a diverse and a better culture, I would say. I think that one thing we've always been very conscious of as well is people's, work-life balance, or work-life integration, I guess we call it nowadays, and the whole person approach that we take to that. So as I mentioned, kind of the pandemic that we've just been through, people not being able to see family and not being able to see their friends and everything, we've been very conscious of that as a business, and we've allowed people to work from anywhere for a period of time. Now, what we have done also has been very intentional with that, and we've set some, flexible working principles around unmissable moments, being flexible, being impact obsessed, and setting and respecting boundaries. So we've shared those. We've done a lot of work with those as a global leadership function. We've shared those with the crew. We've explained what they mean and why they're important to us. I think that brings a level of authenticity about the way that we're trying to design those business outcomes and the way that we're trying to build that culture. We're not just, trying to follow someone's trend. We're actually listening to people's feedback, and then we're designing our own version of that and building principles that we're sharing with the crew. Again, we're trying to do this to help the crew that we have already, and also to hopefully help to attract the right kind of people that want to work in a similar way to the way that we do. We've always measured kind of impact and performance and delivery of work versus, time spent at a desk or in an office or on a system. I think that it's quite an archaic way of measuring any kind of success anyway. And I think that's something we've never tried to do as a business. And thankfully, I see a lot more companies kind of moving towards that now. And that may mean that they have to change the way they work, which is, setting up ways to measure that, or maybe they're introducing an OKR framework or whatever it is that they're doing. But they're having to rethink that, which I think is better for us as a society and better for each individual in those businesses as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. You mentioned boundaries there, and I think that's one of the common things that comes up, if not from people and culture professionals and certainly employees, is this loss of boundaries. There's a ton of great tips and tricks on the internet. If people just want to, if they're concerned about setting boundaries and maintaining boundaries, certainly I would encourage you to research that online. But as employers and HR professionals and managers in businesses, you need to make sure that you're giving permission to your employees to set boundaries. That's the other thing as well. There is no reason for somebody to be online 24 hours a day. There's plenty of tips as to how you can achieve that and how you delineate. But you as employers and managers need to be setting those the foundations to allow that. So that's great.
Yeah, I think that's definitely been a big learning, I think, throughout this period of time, is the flexible not meaning always on. It's finding those boundaries, discussing them, and then kind of working towards them. So yeah, definitely online with that one.
And listening to feedback was the other thing I want to just tease out from that is, and we'll cover this off perhaps in our third episode, but the thing about remote work, and particularly being intentional about it, is that remote work is dynamic. It's going to continue to change. And if you're not listening to the feedback and adapting, you can't turn remote on with a switch on day one. You can't read the 8,000 pages of GitLab's how-to guide or visit Nadia's site and read the 100 articles and expect that to work. It takes time and it takes iteration. Nadia, I want to come back to you on this a little bit, and specifically around the topic of asynchronous. And for those who aren't familiar with the term, it's the ability to work multiple people, multiple locations, multiple timeframes successfully without necessarily being available to each other in real time. You actually run your business. I've noticed a few times we've met. You run your business asynchronously. How do you make that work? Obviously, you've got clients that their needs are there. You have your own personal life, and you've got a great passion for travel that I've noted. How do you make that work, and what's the downside to managing that? Because I think the upsides are pretty obvious.
Yeah. So asynchronous. Many people, so thanks for sharing the definition. That's crucial. It's the opposite of sync, right? The opposite of what we're doing now. Now, if we have people watching this webinar, it's sync. But if they watch it later on the website, it will be async. Magic. Isn't it that way? So yeah, so exactly. Asynchronous it's not just about working when it's best for me, but it's about mutually determined timeframes and goals. So what I see in different companies is that, work when it's best for you. Some people are early birds, some people are night owls, and that's amazing. But the thing is, if you being an early bird is going to drive someone crazy because you work at 5 o'clock, or you're a night owl and you're going to limit your team's performance during business hours because you'll start working in the evening on this task, and that's a big problem. So when we look at async, it's always the alignment that's needed, especially if you work in different time zones. So always think about what needs to be delivered, by when it needs to be delivered. How do I get there? Are there any touch points that I need to follow up on with the team, with clients, with whoever that is, to make sure that you can deliver efficiently?
Yeah.
So I think, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I was going to say we'll and a very important part of enabling all of that is going to be the tools, the communication that you touched on at the outset, and the cadences and ceremonies and stuff. And I think in the interest of time, we'll delve into that in the next episode, because I'm conscious we've got some great questions coming in. But before we get to those, I do want to touch on one last topic about about why remote and why flexible is such an important consideration for businesses looking to build great teams. And that's around something that's obviously very top of mind in the world today. It's about the cost of living and the rapid rise in costs and inflation in just about everywhere in the world at the moment. We certainly from Employment Hero are looking at ways that we can help our clients' employees make their salaries go further. But it is becoming an important consideration in an EVP that people are interested in what perks and what benefits and what discounts, how do they make that salary that you're able to pay them go as far as possible. Jamie, I'm conscious Finder is not necessarily an employee-centric, but it's certainly a consumer-centric website and has some of that. Have you been able to incorporate any of that into your EVP? Is making salaries go further and helping employees get the best value part of your EVP, something you can help them with?
I mean, in terms of the service we offer as a business, we're empowering people to make better decisions, to make more of their money, to save their money. So we actually run internal speed saving sessions within Finder, which is part of our
speed saving.
Speed saving. So similar to speed dating, you would sign up for saving on a credit card or maybe a health insurance plan. You speak to a specialist on that subject within Finder, and they give you tips and tricks on maybe some advice on the best ways to do that, or provide you with some information or articles on how to do that in the business. Now, obviously, our website is full of that as well, but we try and, I guess, use some of the skills we have internally and help our crew with that as well. So that's definitely something we've started to do a bit more of the last while.
Terrific. I'll throw this question to both of you, but I'm particularly interested in Nadia's international experience here. What's the best perk? What's the best non-financial reason that you've seen offered as part of a recruitment campaign to try and attract people to come join you or join your client?
The response is obvious. Workations. Today, it's workations, which is the ability to work from abroad short term, and companies are designing policies to make that happen. The financial aspect is obviously crucial, but I've seen, and there's already data to prove that it's one of the most sought after perks these days to be able to work and travel. And I've seen this exactly responding to inflation and also the crisis that's now going on in Europe when it comes to, well, basically everything. People are willing to escape sometimes even now during wintertime that's coming, to be able to work from a different country for a month or two, or even to spend more time with their relatives. So companies are now investing a lot of money to be able to make that happen. We also see the rise of digital nomad visas globally, and that is also a response to that trend. It's a tricky topic, but definitely it's doable. So I see companies that even start with 2 weeks of short-term working abroad up to 3-4 months, depending on every business case. But that's definitely crucial. And that's the most beautiful thing you can offer today.
Yeah, and there'll be a ton of questions raised about productivity and presentism, but I think again there's a whole host of resources we can't get into that now, but there are answers and solutions to that. Outputs is probably the way I'd sum that up. Jamie, is there anything you wanted to flag?
A big plus one on Nadia's comment there. Obviously, I've just done that myself, so I think that's definitely something we're seeing a lot of the crew at Finder wanting to do, myself included, and I think the part around that is, like I say, creating the principles and the programs, communicating them clearly internally so people know kind of how to go about doing that or how to navigate that situation. One thing to also mention is like just when you're talking about the cost there, whether it's the cost of a train ticket or petrol in terms of commuting to and from an office, or whatever it may be. I think that, spending time with your loved ones and giving the flexibility to do that as well, that's not something you can buy back. So I think that business is giving you the opportunity to do that, and it's not actually a dollar amount, but it's more than that. That's something that's going to be infinitely more important as years come. And if companies don't aim or look at it from that lens, they're going to be missing a big trick there, I think.
Yeah, it's a great point. Thanks for raising it. Definitely. Okay. I almost regret encouraging people to ask questions because we've been inundated. So what I'll say is, if we don't get a chance to answer them all now, we will endeavour to try and answer them online later or in emails. We do have a forum that we'll be able to try and address some of these. The two that came up first, and I don't want to shy away from this because it is a tough question for this conversation. They're variations of the same theme. One is, how is it's to do with organisations that are part site-based and part knowledge-based or remote able. One mentions a car dealership. The other mentions counselling, where obviously face-to-face is required. I have some thoughts on this, but Nadia or Jamie, do either of you want to jump in? This isn't necessarily hybrid where you're part in the office and part at home. This is part of my workforce can be remote and part cannot. Any observations there from either of you? Don't both jump in at once.
Yeah, no, I can take that one. So exactly, there is no one definition of hybrid, and that is actually a crucial response to that question, very briefly. So I think, and I've seen different companies also from the manufacturing industry, where, for example, the entire back office is fully remote, but roles that have to remain on site, they will always be there. So designing, for example, hybrid working policies, flexible working policies, it's always crucial to distinguish the roles that always have to be on site because of maintaining business continuity, and that no hurt feelings. I mean, if you are taking on a role like this, you're not able to operate remotely, you're not able to add value remotely, you have to be there. Then the second category is those roles that can be done partially outside of the office, outside of meeting in real life. And then the third category is being fully remote. The question is, again, what are the principles? What are the expectations? And different companies address it saying, so first they would tell me, and there were companies like that even pre-pandemic, well, but we want to treat everyone equally. I think it has nothing to do with equal or unequal treatment, because if you're a hairdresser, well, you won't be able, unfortunately, to do this remotely, even if you want to. So it's also your choice, and you agree to something. So there is also a lot of common sense needed. And you have to say it up front. This role, you are a security guard. It is on site, because it's not possible to do it any other way. If you want a remote role, you have to shift into something different, and it has to be very loud.
Yeah, I'll jump in there and say, look, I completely understand the issue that's being raised, and people have raised it with us before. There are certain realities, but I think what we're looking at here is how do I manage, almost from a cultural perspective, as well as an equity perspective, how do I manage the fact that some of my employees have this wonderful opportunity to work remotely and be present with their families and save on their commutes and all that kind of stuff. And I think the answer is in what Nadia laid out, which is there are certain realities. And I think it's important to reflect that in perhaps the benefits and perks of people who are on site. There are some obvious ones around lunches and breaks and after work drinks. But I think the two key things are, one is you have to accept the reality and be upfront about it. So it is a site-based job, that's the reality. And then look at it from a remuneration, reward and recognition perspective and see if you can level the playing field a little bit. Jamie, from a cultural perspective, do you think there's anything there? I mean, again, it's just being brutally transparent about the reality, I guess.
Yeah, I don't have anything major to add there. I think, like you said, every situation is nuanced. Every company is different. I think it's just about being very honest about the way you're laying out those intentions, looking at all the various levers you have to play with. So I don't have anything specific to add there from a cultural aspect, really.
I'm going to keep us moving on because there's quite a few questions. I will just say on that, the fact that you have part of your workforce that is site-based should not be a barrier to you unlocking remote for the balance of your workforce. But I agree, you do need to be conscious about that. So look at transparency and being upfront about the requirements, and look at how you can use perks, remuneration, rewards, and other things to try and level the playing field. I did also see a question, which I can't find again now, which was, I think it was a reaction to my comment about the worst of both worlds. And it said, does that mean that if I can only offer hybrid, then it's going to fail? And I don't think that's the case. I did say that I think it's slightly controversial what I said, but again, I think the answer there is you need to set up with the reality that that's what it's going to be. And as long as you're upfront and transparent about what the boundaries are, what the rules are, what the rewards are, then I think you can make hybrid as successful. I just don't think you can unlock that bigger talent pool that's available from all remote. So if you're able to recruit your team locally because you have to, fantastic, set up hybrid for success. A couple of questions are directed at specific people here. The one I wanted was the one it was to you, Nadia. I don't know if you can find it. Something about the difference between what you're seeing in Europe and US and Asia Pacific with regard to the adoption of remote and perhaps the approach to reward and recognition. Are you seeing any big trends that are in Europe and America that are very different to, say, Asia Pacific?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that, okay, maybe that's going to be quite controversial what I'm going to say now too. But um, what Europe is usually adopting is what's being done in the US. So when I work with different companies and I look at different data, it's always like, oh, tell us how they do it in Silicon Valley. So whenever there's a new trend emerging, something is happening over there, it's being adopted very quickly. I think that it comes down to every business and every individual case, because as we spoke here briefly, it's all about the EVP, definitely. It's all about each particular business case. So I think that I wouldn't say that there are crucial differences. I also deal a lot with the Indian market, for example, and I see that this is a step-by-step transition. In the past, there were markets that were more reluctant to that change. One of them in Europe was, for example, Germany. And that's very clear. I remember back in 2019, I was invited to a hybrid conference in Berlin. No one knew what it was. It was, I don't want to say it was a disaster, but it wasn't a success. It's like, no, we've always done it a different way. Today, Germany is one of the pioneers when it comes to adopting flexible working models because they are so well prepared. So I think it is down to, number one, the responses of the governments of how they want to trigger and how they want to implement changes in local employment laws. And that's happening globally. And also companies, how they listen to their people. I don't think that we need different markets to look at it from different perspectives.
Yeah. You've just triggered a thought in me, which is it's been fascinating to see the way that forced work from home through the pandemic has changed the way that the Philippines works. The Philippines has a very long history of a workforce serving global clients. And they were very anti work from home until people started to realize that a 90-minute to 2-hour commute at 5 a.m. in the morning wasn't required anymore. And the regulators and the government and the lobbyists who were pushing for return to the offices actually had to stop and listen to the masses because it's a big issue. So yeah, I think you're right. It's going to differ, but I'm no doubt we'll see some more changes and variances around the world. Jamie, one for you. With your teams being located in a hybrid mix of locations, how do you encourage engagement within teams and connections with the business overall? Actually, there's a bunch of questions around this, so I'll just give you the broader mandate, and Nadia will come to you too. How do you keep a distributed team engaged, and what opportunities do you create for that? Jamie, can I start with you?
Yeah. I think you can even bring that back down to, or not back down to, but just bring it back to the way that you're working as a team in general. We have a set of shared OKRs as a talent function within Finder. They're shared on a common place so everyone can see what they're working on. We actually did a bit of work at the start of those as well, where we ran a couple of sessions to suit a few different time zones, Denver and Poland, and then Sydney in the Philippines, and work through what we thought our theme should be, our 4 kind of key pillars of our work around attraction, selection, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. And we then gave the crew an opportunity to input asynchronously as well as synchronously. So we did a time for them to talk through these things, then also gave them the space to think about it themselves and keep adding to that as well. We then had a kind of debrief session on it and pulled those together, agreed them, and we're also collaborating on those, again, synchronously and asynchronously. We have weekly catch-ups on them, but we also have our own time to work on those and contribute to the documents and practices that we're building. We also try and have a bit of fun during those things as well. It's not purely let's focus on our OKRs and get work done. It's, genuinely hearing about what everyone else has been up to. And session today with Julianne, who works in the Philippines, just came back from South Korea, and she was talking about her experience there. And we try and do a bit of that as well to keep people connected, obviously using the tools to kind of keep the communication going there as well, when we're not just on Zoom calls or meeting in person as well. So probably nothing amazingly groundbreaking, but I think, again, it's about being intentional the way you're working day to day from the beginning, and then making opportunities for team to work synchronously and asynchronously on those things is the win there for me.
Yeah, terrific. Nadia, but I'm going to keep your answer to a limited time. What are your top tips for getting people engaged when they're remote?
Start with intrinsic motivation. okay, when you hire people, that's number one.
So alignment of
Okay.
mission, clear on the mission, clear on the purpose. Getting on it.
Absolutely, yes. And then create an environment where people can thrive. And that's what makes people engaged. I've seen companies willing to engage people by sending jars of honey during wintertime. I always mention that because I really like tea with honey, but it's not going to make me engaged if nothing is set up and nothing sets me up for success in the company. So listen to your people, and that's how they will be engaged most, versus the business goals, the motivation, and the entire, so to say, back end of your business. And that's what is going to boost the whole team's engagement, not just inventing whatever just because you think so. It's the people that matter most.
Yeah, terrific. I'll just add to that. I think there's a ton of examples online, a lot of literacy online about the fact that you still can bring people together, right? It's still only a relatively small world when we're not locked down. And so at Employment Hero, we had a great opportunity to bring our entire global workforce together for a week. It was fantastic. There was very much a focus on having fun, as well as a blending in of development and work-related stuff. What we're looking to establish, and we may even look to publish it, although I don't know if that's going to be possible. We're looking to establish a cadence of, large global gatherings on a maybe a biannual, every 2-year basis, down to more local gatherings on a monthly basis, and look to get those cadences set up. And also online engagement. We do fun Zoom things and stuff like that. They were a bit arduous during the pandemic, but we find they work really well now too. So that's a couple of tips around that. There was one observation here from Nick that I'm just going to read out, and I think he's highlighting the fact that remote work provides an extra challenge to leaders and managers, which I think is absolutely the case. There's a lot more reliance on trust and developing a sense of belonging. His belief is that leaders need to get further training to ensure that they're remote able, for want of a better word, and can set up teams to thrive. Do you agree? I think we would all roundly agree. And I think that intentional, it's very much part of that intentional move towards remote. But do either of you have any words for leaders who are in organizations looking to go remote? Any advice?
I think it's shifting from top down to bottom up management and leadership, and also getting rid of a huge issue, especially in hybrid teams today, which is proximity bias. Not everything that you see is really the case. So learn to track performance in a different way than just presenteeism. So that's just very briefly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you as a business are expecting your managers to be good at this, you need to contribute to them being good at it. So make sure you're offering them training and these kind of things. We have all of our people partners globally helping support our managers on actually how to have these discussions, how to run remote teams effectively. So again, I think you need to be training people and being part of the solution there, and not just looking at it as a problem for your business.
Awesome. Look, there's a ton of questions here that we're not going to get to, but we need to wrap it up because we're on time. I want to start by thanking both Nadia and Jamie. Thank you very much for your time and your insights. I think we're going to put up some contact details for you on LinkedIn. Is that? Yep, that's up there now. So if anyone wants to reach out to Jamie or Nadia, I'm sure that you'll be able to find them online, and very much appreciate your time and insights, as I say. We're also introducing something new, which particularly for those who'll be watching this on recording, and for those questions that we haven't been able to answer today, we've created a group on LinkedIn. It's going to be a closed group because the intention is that just for HR professionals, hiring managers, general managers who have questions and want to learn more about various situations, learn from other people about working remote. So that link, although it's fairly ungainly, will be available in some of the emails that we'll send out to follow up. If you'd like to jump in there, you can raise your questions. Myself and a few others will be there, and hopefully your peers who have been living and learning about the dynamic nature and the excitement of rolling out remote. We'll pick up that conversation with a couple of people next week. In the meantime, then, just one more time, thank you very much, Nadia and Jamie. I hope you've all been able to get a few valuable insights from our conversation today, and we'll look forward to talking to you all again soon. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers, Nadia.